No, only because I'm turning it back over to Commissioner DiGiulio. We have highlighted 3 areas for this remaining discussion on tech and anything else I would like to bring up. But just so we can move forward again, we have an hour and 15 minutes, and we have 2 other committee reports to get to, and a few final thoughts from the chair regarding this evening's meeting. So I'll turn it back over to Commissioner DiGiulio. Can you please provide us, if we have reached a conclusion with Ms. Johnston's help regarding your suggestion?
Yes. Okay. So this is the benefit of not being attorney. You can easily ask for forgiveness because you honestly had no clue about some of these, despite my training. I should have realized this. Okay. So what we've decided is based on this, there are a couple comments that in this commissioner comments regarding the first draft map, and we're going to post this document that has a couple of our comments on it, and that'll be a static document. But to address the issue of us trying to make some progress about addressing these issues prior to the actual line drawing sessions, what we have decided to do, based on our council's advice, is to encourage all the commissioners, again, to get all their comments together, to compile those, and to send them to staff. We said Lon and Janice. Should we just make it one person? I'm sorry.
Yes, if you could send them through to Janice, and then if she has...
Send all of your comments to Janice. And may I say that the way for ease of tracking would be to make sure you designate the district, Assembly, Senate, Congressional. If you can't, please try and identify the name of the district. Those are the headings that are on the map already. And then your comments. And also if you have any suggestions for improvement, of course, that would help as well. So again, if you could identify the district name, and what the comments are. That way, what will happen is staff will compile that information. And if you could entitle it Commissioner Comments on first draft maps, something like that, so they'll easily be able to identify that. And what we would like to do is have those comments to be able to review for our June 23rd meeting. So that would give you a deadline of, and let's say we'd like to have one day to look at that. So let's say by June 21st, you need to have all that information to Ms. Sargis, and that way she can compile that and give that back to us by June 22nd for our discussion on June 23rd. So that means we'll have some work to do in reviewing those on the road, but if you could do that, that will move us along in the process quite a bit further. Okay, so that's the end of that. Oh, sorry. Commissioner
Can I just ask if there was anything in the now defunct Google document that was feedback? Will that automatically transfer to Ms. Sargis?
The stuff, it's going to be posted online too, so I'll make sure she incorporates that. It's correct. Okay.
Next, what we wanted to take a look at is continue our discussion and make decisions regarding the calendar.
Okay.
So, Commissioner DiGiulio, I'll turn it back over to you. Part of that discussion would be a consideration of Commissioner Yao's comment regarding whether we will even have a second draft, and also looking at whether or not we would have any input after if we do have a second draft. Please
Correction,
continue.
third draft.
Third draft, excuse me.
No, there's no third draft.
There's second draft.
There is no third draft.
And then the third round of input post-second draft if we do that. So Commissioner DiGiulio.
Okay, I'm going to throw out the original idea that we wanted to do is to propose this timeline, but I'd also, not to throw a wrench in it, but I think we have to put this discussion on the table, is currently the proposed timeline would be moving the second draft date to the 12th with the possibility of maybe even pushing it to the 14th if we had to. So this is what I'd like to see if the commission would like to vote on. But before we take that vote, let me throw this other idea out. And I think it's a little bit of what Commissioner Yao was saying, but there is concern that there's still the concern that we're not going to be able to process all the public comments, take into consideration all the public comments if we have limited time to review those public comments before we start giving direction to line drawers. And a reminder that any public comments that come after the second draft map are going to be able to be minimally incorporated into the final draft map unless they're really those neighborhood and community levels. One thing we should consider is not having a second draft map. If we don't have a second draft map, then we are able to push back the ability to get public comments in, processed, and back to us as commissioners for our consideration, so that when we do go into the final line drawing sessions, we will have enough time to take into consideration and to incorporate those into our line drawing sessions. The problem, so that's the issue, because if we have a second draft map, the last date to submit that would be July 14th. You have to have 14 days public review. So we've already pushed back that second draft map as far as we can. So the trade-off here is, if you'd like to have a second draft map, then you will have less time to review those public comments. If you would like to have more time to review the public comments, then most likely that will result in not having a second draft map.
So at this time, I'd like us to focus on this issue first, because it will affect how we take a look at the calendar. So does anyone have any comments? Commissioner Raya?
A question. Is there another option, having the second draft without hearings?
You can yes, you can have the second draft map without you mean the third. Yeah, the hearings really are not a part of the discussion in terms of whether we have a second draft map, because the point of moving the only reason we would not have a second draft map is because you would have to push out that date in order to incorporate the public comments into that second draft map. You would have to push it out so far that you could not allow for the 14-day public review period that's necessary before we would do a final map. So in essence, again, if the trade-off is we could still have no public input hearings in the third round, but still want to have a second draft, but could only be at the 14th at the latest.
Okay, well, excuse me. The reason that I was asking it in that way is that having the second draft, could essentially end up being the final map, regardless of what kind of input you get after the second draft comes out. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's kind of, if you don't have any other extra hearings, that buys us 4 days, is how I look at it, because of travel time and hearing time. So I'm wondering if you sort of accomplish the same thing if you have the second draft but no, personal appearances.
I think the only. Well, let me see if I've got this right. Maybe I'm not quite understanding it, but I think what we're trying to say is, how much do you want to incorporate public comments into the second map versus how much you want to incorporate them into the final map? Because the public comments you'd receive for the final map would be, even if we were able to review them, what we can do with them is much more limited than what we can do with the public comments for the second map. And so it's not that we're trying to prioritize the public comments for to be incorporated in the second draft map are more important, but the reality is we'll be able to accommodate those public comments more in a second draft map. So the idea is, if we want to maximize that consideration of public comments, that would mean pushing that second draft map back so far that it would be, in essence, your final map.
Commissioner Malloy.
So I want to make sure that I'm understanding the option that's on the table, and I'm looking at the dates on your proposed work plan timeline, and I just want to walk through a couple of the key milestones.
Okay.
So if we say that July 12th is the second draft map release, and what I also heard was that we would need 5 days prior to the summary of public comments in order to, you have a cutoff period, say on the 15th. So we would essentially have, from the day we release the 12th, we would have until the 15th to review public comments that are coming in. Then there would be a cutoff, and we're saying public, at this point, comments are not going to influence the maps anymore. We get the summary on the 20th, and then on the 21st, we immediately go into line drawing. Is that a rough?
I think it's just what you would do with the public comments that you're set for that final map. It's not that they would have to be the public comments that are just focused on the very small details, because that's all we're doing for the final map is the small detail correction. Mm-hmm. It's the nature of what what we'd be doing in that in the live line drawing directions for the final map. We're not. We might be getting a ton of public comments, but only what can be incorporated are those that are related to the nuances. So that's where I'm saying I think there's more opportunity to take into consideration public comments for the second draft map than there is for the final draft map. So if that is our assumption that we can honor some of those public comments better in the second draft map, then we have to ask ourselves, how much time do we want in order to be able to for us as commissioners to process that, and for our technical team to be able to get those comments to us, knowing that even our last public hearing and coding all that data and turning it around in a report is only 2 days prior to when they're supposed to summarize, and that's their summary. That's what they need to give it to us. So if we're getting the summary the day before we do line drawing, there's not a lot of time for us to process those comments. So that's
Commissioner Baraba?
I'm in favor of having the second draft map, for not just for the purpose of having people react to it, but getting us input back. But I think the release of the first draft maps had a really important role to play in the education of what we were doing. And I think the way the press and interested parties got involved in discussing the maps, I think was really quite beneficial for society as a whole. And it would seem to me that if we came out with our second draft maps, and as we would expect they'd be an improvement on the first, I think just getting that out and letting people understand that we are at a process and we're informing them of the changes that we've made, and that we are not in a position to make a lot of other changes other than some fine-tuning, I think that sends a much better message.
Okay. Commissioner Yao?
I'm also in support of having the second draft map. While we're working on a map starting now until such time that we finalize the map, we always have a latest version of the map. So it doesn't really have to be, quote unquote, meeting a certain criteria before we can release it as a draft. Just having a release of a map gives the public a better idea as to where we stand. I think for that reason, it's probably very important to keep that second draft going.
Commissioner Antai? It's the switch, silver switch.
There you go. Just carrying on what Commissioner Baraba said, we've got some really good comments back, I think, after the release of the first map, and that's, I think, really helping us to shape our decisions at this point on. So just carrying on the same comment that Commissioner Baraba said, I think we should really think about shortening this process, and I think Commissioner Yao's suggestion is a good one. Commissioner
Ward?
I concur with Commissioner Antai with shortening the third round process. As we talked about a couple weeks ago in F&A meeting, but I do think that it's important to do outreach and hearings after release of the second draft map. Obviously, we've promised a second draft map to the public throughout this process, and I'm most concerned that the first draft, is self-described rough. There was no, like I said, little VRA analysis done. We've got a lot of data still to come in that's going to dramatically shift what's out there. And so I'm concerned that a lot of the public comment that we're getting is probably reactionary to the first draft that we've released, which probably is going to evolve into something drastically different by the second time around. So a lot of the reaction and public comment to that first rough draft might not be so helpful in the later stage. Whereas if we can get a second draft out there, we're going to get more meaningful input on how to fine-tune it and make a better product. And I'm, again, really in favor of doing some public hearing after the second draft, mostly because in looking at the schedule, it's going to be really tight, it seems, from what I can tell, from the time that the RPV data and the VRA analysis altogether is done, if that would be implemented into the second draft or not. And if it's not, then it'll be done obviously between the second draft and the third draft, and I think it would be really important to get some public comment and feedback on what the results of all that shows and how it's applied to our maps.
Commissioner Forbes?
Yes, I'd like to concur with Commissioner Baraba, but also I think Commissioner Ward made an important comment. We have created an expectation that it's going to be a second draft. We have said that for 6 months. I don't think at this point we can say, oh, we've changed our minds, we're not going to have a second draft. With regard to having public outreach meetings, I think that's still, for me, an open question. Again, one of the main reasons for having 2 public outreach meetings is that we've said for months that we would have public outreach meetings after the second draft. And so meeting a public expectation is part of what we're about. And so that's my comment.
Looks like everybody wants to chime in, so I'm going to give everybody just one final thought on that because we can move forward. But I've got Commissioner Dye, Commissioner Blanco, and Commissioner Aguirre, and then I think everybody's spoken. We almost.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I support the idea of doing a second draft map. I don't think that we need to do public hearings after that. I think we can accept public comment electronically and actually be very specific about what kind of comment we're actually going to be able to take into account, because I think it's important to set expectations with the public. If they think they're going to see the same level of changes that they saw between the first and the second, between the second and the final, that's just not going to happen. So I think going out and having public hearings actually raises that expectation, and so I think I would be against actually doing public hearings after the second draft, but accepting public comment.
Commissioner Blanco.
So I also agree we should have a second draft. We now, in hindsight, know that we've released a rough draft. And who knows, even though our second, iteration we are now thinking is going to be 99.9% final, you never know. You never know what's going to happen, after the second draft and the comments that come in. So I think we should do it for expectations, and also because I have been incredibly impressed with the comments we've gotten. And a lot of the comments have filled in gaps that we had where communities had not turned out in person, and our first maps reflected to some extent, I'd say, a little bit of a lopsided emphasis on those that appeared before us and didn't capture those that had been silent. That may be also that dynamic could happen one more time, although we're beginning to see more feedback. So I think we should do the second draft. I think we should think carefully about what we do with the next, what we're calling input hearings after that second draft. I'd like for us to be a kind of creative and strategic. I know I've raised to some people the fact that just like we had at one point statewide or multi-district hearings where people that were doing multi-district maps could present those, would we want to have, say, an LA hearing? I think when we do the second draft maps, we will have a sense of what were the areas that still we know are sort of the most complex, and we might want to, and we probably know those now to some extent, we might want to be very targeted in terms of written submissions. We don't even, but like soliciting, I think our council has been very clear that we can actually ask people to come and make presentations to us, that not everything, so I think our form, I guess I'm saying, I don't think we have to have the hearings. I think we should have the input that comes to us in whatever form is the most effective and of best use for us, and not necessarily stick to the same format, because I do think the travel time eats up a lot of time. But that doesn't mean that we're not doing hearings, doesn't mean we're not getting feedback. I think we just have to be more creative and strategic about how we get the feedback.
Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes, I agree with Commissioner Blanco and others who have argued for draft map, perhaps without any hearings, although there will be some things as we move very fast toward this goal, there will be some areas that will call extraordinarily for our attention. So retaining the flexibility for us to go and visit in those areas or those regions where the necessity arises.
Commissioner DiGiulio.
Okay, so I think maybe this is a time for a motion regarding the timeline. And I think I'm glad we had this discussion because I think it reemphasizes what Commissioner Anchetta and I originally had was a second draft map and how do we make that happen with the most ability for us as commissioners to be able to have more time with our line drawers. To that extent, I do think that we also realize that there's going to be limited. By having a second draft map, it does limit us in the ability to synthesize the public comments to the commissioners. To that end, I will put that on the list to work out some more details with our staff and our consultants into how we can try and have. I don't know if there's options to be able to take public comments and summarize those on an ongoing basis between now and our first half. I think we're limited, but I will say that I will task myself with trying to find the best option to give feedback to the commissioners about our public comments. But I'll put that high on the list. But know that it's limited if we go with a second draft map. So I will really do our best. So
okay. So what it sounds like is this commission has agreed that we will have the second draft. So
correct.
If we can move to the discussion between the 12th and the 14th, and whether we would agree to push back from the 7th.
Correct. So I think under this, the proposal I would say is that we would have the 12th be our release of our second draft map, knowing that we have the ability to go the 14th as our drop dead, but I'd like to see that we could be maybe efficient and move forward. And knowing, too, that there is a holiday in the middle of that, not that I think our life, it doesn't matter whether it's a holiday or a Sunday or a midnight. I think everything blurs. But if I would like to propose now that we shoot for the 12th and know that we have some wiggle room.
You making a motion in that regard?
I'd like to see if the commission is willing to adopt a proposed work plan timeline as suggested.
Second. Well.
Correct. I'm sorry. It would be the release of the second draft map would be pushed to the July 12th.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Glamis-Malloy.
I just have a clarification where there are dates that we're currently calendared to have meetings, but they are not reflected on the work plan. Are we to assume that those dates would be released?
We would, if once we get approval from the commission on this work proposed timeline, then we would be working with our staff to adjust the dates and the agenda, notice accordingly. We just didn't want to duplicate work for them now until we had it finalized. And I would just say that this motion would include not just the 12th as the draft map release date, but then the according dates prior to that in terms of increasing our contact with the line drawers to have two options to talk to them in depth.
Well, that's where I had. I'm sorry, are you finished?
I just had one follow-up then, just to note that the work plan is really focused on the map-making function of the commission, and we have not integrated into that the business meeting side. So what I'm assuming from what you're saying is then you'll be working with staff to finalize when we will need agendized business meetings other than just line drawing sessions.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Janice will cover my back on that, yes.
Actually, I just want to make sure I have clarification of your motion because it sounded like it was two items essentially. An adoption of your timeline on your proposed work plan, which would be June 28th through July 31st. In addition, and in so doing, we'd be pushing the draft map back to July 12th. Is that correct?
I would like to be clear that this is to propose the work plan timeline as it is stated here, and that does have included within it the draft date of the release of the second draft map as July 12th.
Okay. Commissioner Parvenu.
I just wanted to get an idea on that Tuesday, the 12th, where we will be meeting at. I'm assuming it's going to be similar to what we've did with the release of the first.
I believe so,
in
yes.
Sacramento.
Yeah. And can I just can I make the caveat to that timeline pending the final decision on the third round input hearings? Or do we want to have that discussion now and include that? Because it sounds like there's still... yeah. So maybe I should say, well, let me take out the July 16th and 17th third round input hearings that are suggested. Remove that from that proposed timeline, and the rest of it will stand, and we'll have the discussion for the third round input hearings on a separate issue.
So you're amending your motion, Ms. Sargent. We're amending the motion to be to ask the commission to adopt the work plan timeline from July 28th through July 12th. And who seconded the motion? And you concur with the amendment?
Absolutely.
Okay. I have Commissioner Yao and Commissioner Ward.
The second draft is as much for the public as it is for us who are working on it. And I think the earlier we release it, the more the public would have a better idea as to where we stand, where we're heading, which direction we're leaning. We don't know, again, at that particular time, what remaining work that we have to do prior to the release of the final map. And I think at this stage of the game, eating another week into the schedule and shortening our opportunity to make any further changes or adjustments time-wise is not appropriate. So I won't be supporting this new schedule.
Commissioner Ward.
I think I definitely understand the necessity to change the second draft to the 12th. I think the concern I had is with this motion is leaving the flexibility to push it back to the 14th as an option. I think I'd be more comfortable with making the 12th a hard deadline, mainly because of the 5 days between the 23rd and 28th. That leaves the public and us as a commission really very little time to fine-tune, get any kind of feedback on that map and then fine-tune anything. So that's my thought.
I would be willing to accept that as July 12th as a hard deadline.
And Commissioner Braba, do you concur?
I do.
Okay. Any further discussion, especially with this amendment?
So it would be for the entire work plan timeline from June 28th to July 31st, with the exception of the July 16th and 17th third round input hearings.
So you've modified it again?
No, that was what it was. I think you had reclarified. I wanted to make sure that she understood it, because you had said up until July 12th, second draft map release, and that was not my proposal. My proposal was the work plan timeline from June 28th to July 31st, with the exception of the July 16th and 17th third round input hearings.
Apologize, misunderstood. Ms. Sargis, do you understand that?
And let me clarify why I say that is only because I think what we've talked to with Ms. McDonald in terms of what's necessary to do the final, for us to do the operations of the final map is not, I'm not saying it's not negotiable, but that's kind of what the needs have been relayed to us. So that structure wouldn't change. It was just simply the discussion of the third round input hearings for a later time.
Okay, and Commissioner Baraba, was that your understanding?
It was.
Okay. And Ms. Sargis, do you have that down? Well, I won't have you read it back yet, but if you have any questions, because I need to get to Commissioner Anchetta before we vote.
I believe I have it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Anchetta?
Yeah, I did want to note that the timeline does not include any discussion of the reports that are supposed to accompany the maps, but I believe because we're taking that as a separate discussion item, we'll talk about the scope of the reports and the particular deadlines and timelines for those as a separate matter. But ultimately, assuming we have timelines for those will be integrated into this timeline as well.
And we understand that the business meetings aren't in here either, so this is just strictly math drawing. Correct. And hearings. Any further discussion on this amendment or motion, excuse me? Any public comment on the motion? Okay, seeing none, then I'd ask for Ms. Sargis to read the motion back.
The motion is to adopt the proposed work plan that spans June 28th through the July 31st, with the exception of the July 16th and 17th input hearings, and change the release date of the second draft maps to July 12th.
And I would just add that it was the proposed work plan timeline.
I do have a question. The work plan, is it the one on Google Docs or is it a different one?
The work plan timeline is under the one that I had put on Google Docs, which I gave you access to for the work plan assumptions and timeline.
It's entitled Work Plan Assumptions Timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Then we have a roll call vote on the motion, please. I already opened it up. There was no public comment, sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Sargis.
Commissioner Aguirre,
Yes.
Vanchetta,
Yes.
Baraba,
Yes.
Blanco,
Yes.
Dye,
Yes.
DeJulio,
Yes.
Wilkins Weber,
Yes.
Forbes,
Yes.
Columbus Malloy,
Yes.
Antai,
Yes.
Parvenu,
Yes.
Raya,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Yao.
No.
The motion passes.
We're really running out of time here. Let's quickly have a discussion, let's say for 5 minutes, it shouldn't be much, about what the issue is on whether we're going to have the input hearings and or what type of hearings we're going to have, or would the commission wish to defer this till next week and think about it a little bit? Deferral, or would you like to make a decision and discussion now? And I'll leave that up to Commissioner DeJulio as well in your work plan.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was
whether
just
you would
looking
like us
at Ms. Sargis in terms of, I believe she had given us a drop dead timeline for making those decisions. Isn't that
Today.
was that June 23rd is the deadline? I think we were hoping to have the decision on the third round today.
Oh, okay.
So maybe we
you're
could
right.
start.
We do need we
Yeah.
have venue issues and
Correct.
okay. So the proposal, or at least some of the discussion, has been. I'll leave it up to Commissioner Dye to start us off. How's that sound? Rather than me making it up along the way. Great.
I would like to make a motion that we not hold public input hearings for the third round, but still accept public comment with a cutoff date to be determined by our work plan team here.
Second.
Just pausing momentarily, just make sure that Ms. Sargis can get it down. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Aguirre and Commissioner Ward?
Does that include the possibility of, going to a particular area as necessary, as needed, or is it just absolutely no public hearings at all?
I'm going to have Commissioner Dye answer that, but I think that the issue with going to specific places is raising the expectation that we'll be able to. We're going there for some real input from them, to be honest, is to get some input. And at that point, what we will be doing for the last draft map, for the final map, will be on a very small, nuanced level. So if we identify, we say, well, we haven't quite got it right in this area, so we're going to come back and talk to you about that. We have to have it right in the second draft map in terms of overall. What we don't have right may be, have we split your neighborhood or your street or your community? So I think it's hard to go to just two places in the state trying to get that level of detail. It's almost not fair. I'm hoping we could do some targeted strategic outreach to those areas we've identified so we can incorporate it into the second draft maps. That's my idea.
Commissioner Ward.
My concern about this motion is that it kind of violates the very spirit of what we've tried to accomplish, as a commission, with transparency and making the public partners in the process. The thought of releasing a second draft, which is really at this point going to be our first map that's going to have a lot of the full data set in it, built into it, and not going back out to the public and providing them a chance to directly address us and provide us options to make it better, especially in light of the fact that we already have identified that written comment has been robust and difficult to keep up with as it is. To leave that as the only viable avenue for the public to express their opinions about the second draft, I think is not adequate. So I'd urge the Commission to carefully consider what not only does it do to, again, the process of this commission and what we're trying to accomplish, but also if it does, in fact, diminish the public's voice in being able to provide its input in getting this right.
I had you next, Commissioner Baraba, from earlier, I thought.
Yes, I appreciate Commissioner Ward's comments, but it's one thing to go out there and get input and then do something with it. In this case, we'd be going out there and getting input and then not being able to do anything with it, which I think in this case would not be in the spirit of how we started this.
Commissioner Blanco.
Well, I was thinking of a kind of compromise on this. I am concerned about about comments after the second draft. I think we have said that we will, of course, take written comments. But I'm wondering if, I know I'm beginning to sound like a broken record, but I wonder whether instead of sort of going on the road, which is part of what takes a lot of time, is if we had a situation where we set aside a day or 2 days where we're in one place and people come to us. I mean, we did that in the beginning where people came to us. We had a couple of full day, or maybe a full day hearing where people came to us and remember they presented to us what they were doing in terms of outreach and, whether we could set aside a day where people could come, and if there are just things that people absolutely need to have heard, have us hear and present to us, we could do that, but not I agree that going back out on the road and sort of raising this expectation that we're doing this public hearing process like we've been doing, where people will come and will make big changes, is a false expectation. So, but I am reluctant to not have at least one opportunity in a hearing, in a public hearing, where people could come right before we say we're done. And so that's, maybe I'd like some reactions to that notion.
Commissioner Raya.
Even going to one place means some people have to travel, so whatever direction it happens to be. So I think that's still a concern. I think the difficulty, the difficulties have been stated somewhat. Just having 2 places to go is not going to nearly cover. There are going to be people dissatisfied that they did not have the opportunity to speak. But more than that, even if you do it, we've already seen, and I'm sure we're going to see tonight and in the following nights, the frustration that many members of the public feel when they find out they have 2 minutes to rush through a presentation. So if they have something really important to say, the chance of getting it in may not even exist at all, given the limits on our time. One of the things that Mr. Wilcox and I talked about was in the outreach or the informational side of this for the current set of hearings and going forward is, how to focus, how to frame the issues and, help the public focus on what we're looking for. And just here, I don't know how realistic this is, and you guys are going to laugh given that I'm the one proposing it, but something like a virtual hearing, right? Am I right? Technology exists? Okay, good. Thank you. We could all be somewhere, or half of us could be there and the other half, half in Northern California, half in Southern California, and connect. In some way, people can go somewhere and then talk to us.
Commissioner Galams-Malloy.
I am so amazed that Commissioner Raya got to it before I was going to suggest it. I think that what really unites us across the commission is the value that we've put on the public testimony. And so what we're grappling with here is not whether we value it, but how we think we can best maximize it given the amount of resources and the amount of time that we have. So I was thinking something along the lines of what Commissioner Raya suggested. What if we did have a regional approach, potentially a Northern California, Southern California. Let's just take that as an example, but maybe the Northern California commissioners could go to a certain location. Members of the public could come there. Other commissioners could convene somewhere in Southern California and be able to participate in the proceedings that way. And we could do vice versa for Southern California. Because I think one thing that we know as commissioners, but I don't know that it's on the public's radar, is the trade-offs of having us as commissioners travel around the state. I mean, quite frankly, the amount of time it takes me to prepare for a trip, pack, get to the airport, sit on a plane, get to the venue across the state, spend hours on the freeways, going to the different hearings. Those are all blocks of time that I'm not able to review public comments, that we are not really able to sit and think about how we will implement some of the feedback that we're getting from the public. And so I think as we try and fine tune what we do with this next round, that really needs to be some of the framing of how we communicate this to the public, that we're trying to maximize the scarce time and financial resources we have so that their input can actually influence the final product in a better way.
Okay, Commissioner Forbes.
I think we should have some kind of a hearing structure. I think part of this is it's not only that we can incorporate what they say, it's to give them an opportunity to say it. We should make the caveats and understand that we can't make major changes, but this has been a public process, and I think it's important that we continue to do that. With regard to this split venue that was proposed, I think that's possible. I'm not sure it's necessary. And the last comment I want to make is that as we go through these maps and I read the comments, and I don't want to eliminate the potential need for making another trip to Southern California. I just see, but hopefully there won't be any problems. But that to me I want to leave that on the table.
I'll just throw in my 2 cents real quick, which is that I do recognize the intent, and I also recognize that these hearings would probably have to take a different focus if we did consider them. The motion on the floor, though, at this point, Commissioner DiGiulio, did you want to add something just real quick on this
Yes,
motion?
because I just to throw something out that I will probably support this, but I do it reluctantly simply because I think we have made some commitments that we would go out after we do it, but I just don't think it's the best use of our time, and I think there's an equity issue in terms of if we just go to 2 places in the state, that still leaves a lot of people out. But I would like to see if we could ask public information to see if there's another way that we may not be asking for people to do input, because I think that's the problem here, is the input aspect. So I would vote for this because I don't think that it would be wise use of anyone's time for input, but there may be an opportunity for us to go out and do some education or presentation of our meetings as a group, which I think would be maybe a nice compromise in this situation. So that's what I would like. I'll vote for the motion, but I'd like to see if we can explore another way to do some outreach that doesn't involve input.
Okay, so
except for that's done electronically.
Commissioner Dye, this was your motion.
Yes, and I still support my own motion, and I think it's primarily for a lot of the reasons that were stated. I think the issue of equity. I think Commissioner Blanco's point that the written comment has been quite good, and it's hard to do all that in 2 minutes. And whether we do it virtually or in person, we're still going to be faced with a time limit. And really, I think in all fairness to all Californians, in order to truly give equal access, allowing for written submissions across the state is really the fairest way, because no matter where we go, we're going to be advantaging a certain part of the state. So I like the idea of potentially doing some presentation and educational sessions, but that I think is a separate issue from input. And then there's just the practical issue of how much time we have to incorporate that input, as Commissioner Baraba said.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Ward, did you have a question?
I just wanted to ask staff counsel a quick question, because one of the things that several months ago staff counsel had briefed us on is that the importance of, or one of the tools of going out into the public and receiving that testimony was that if our maps are challenged in court, being able to show that we went out into the communities and solicited input from them directly was one of the things that helps protect something that might be contended in our maps. And I'm curious, with the amount of changes that are likely to occur between the first draft and the second draft, if we don't actually go out into the communities and do any outreach or public input to the commission, does that in any way weaken defense of our final product? I was just wondering if staff counsel had an opinion on that based off of what we've been provided previously from staff counsel.
Ms. Johnston.
I think you do have to allow for public input, but whether that's in writing or at a meeting or by whatever other means, I think is up to the commission to decide what's the most effective way to do that.
Okay. At this time, there is a motion on the floor. Commissioner Antai, can you make it quick?
Yeah, just one question. Follow up on Commissioner Rye's virtual presentation. We're sort of doing it right now. We're live, right? So, Commissioner Rye, I think your notion was to have the public interact live in a public setting like this. Is that what you had in mind?
That is what I had in mind.
All right.
Okay, we can get to a discussion about what it might dependent on this motion, I suspect. So where are we at? But for the vote, well, public comment on the motion that's pending right now, which is to disregard or take away the public input hearings post second draft map. Seeing no public comment, then we'll have Ms. Sargis read the motion back, please.
The motion is that the Commission will not hold any public input hearings after the release of the second draft maps, but will encourage the submission of written public comments with a cutoff date to be determined.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes.
Commissioner Ward?
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry, no.
Commissioner Raya?
Yes.
Parvenu?
Yes.
Antai?
Yes.
Galambos Malloy?
I'm sorry, I have to ask a clarifying question. With this motion, it means that it's completely off the table, even the concept of a virtual hearing.
I made this not going out to do a public hearing. Physical. Yeah, a physical public hearing. So, if you want to, if there's a way to, I also don't think we have time to do a virtual hearing, but that's a separate issue.
We're clearing the calendar. Let's put it that way.
It's still.
The discussion for maybe a virtual hearing could be taken up again if you'd like to propose an option to do that, because we are still within our noticing requirements. But this motion, as I understand, is simply to eliminate the input hearings as we've had them structured in the past.
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes?
No.
Wilkins Weber?
Yes.
DeGiulio?
Yes.
Dye?
Yes.
Blanco?
No.
Baraba?
Yes.
Anchetta?
Yes.
Aguirre?
No.
10-4, the motion passes.
Thank you. I recommend that if anybody has any other thoughts about what to do with those days and the work plan, commissioners will be working on that as well. I'd like to move on. We are running out of time, and I understand, Commissioner Raya, you do have some significant things you need action on from the Commission in your committee report. Did you? I don't remember. I think it was consideration of Los Angeles meeting, wasn't it? We'll talk about it later. Okay. I would like to turn it back over to Commissioner Anchetta because we have two bigger items and elements for discussion in the tech and outreach that we do need to address, and we'll be taking public comment at 4:45. So we have a half an hour, ladies and gentlemen. So please, Commissioner DeGiulio, did you have anything further? Otherwise, I was going to turn it over to Commissioner Anchetta.
No, I was just the sign for cracking the whip. That's all.
My voice, my tone? No. Okay.
I was encouraging it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Anchetta.
Do you have a preference on the ones that I had identified?
As I understood it, and the preference that I would prefer was this parallel track. You had some options for, and then we'll get to the report. The report's going to be a fairly quick discussion, then I can wrap that up for you pretty quickly.
Okay. So you might want to refer to the, again, this is the work plan summary document, which is a different document on Google Docs, but the recommendation, and I'm going to put out a couple different options here for discussion. This is not a motion yet, but what we are suggesting is that, particularly with respect to the Section 2 districts, that in order to have some efficiency regarding any revisions that we might make to the existing plan, that we would try to designate a working group that would certainly work with Q2 and Gibson Dunn to look at look at alternative Section 2 maps that are presented in statewide maps, to look at some of the COI testimony and related neighborhood testimony that's in the database, and we're being in consultation with Dr. Barreto regarding his polarized voting analyses. Now, the underlying goal is to try to get to the Commission by perhaps by the 23rd, if we can get something together, 24th, one of the earlier meetings, some progress reports, and then by the time we get to the first line drawing meeting, that there would be some set of recommendations that might be presented in terms of actions. Now, how specific and what level of recommendations is, I think, the point of discussion. I think we need to pursue this track simply because of the timeline. Because if we just focusing on Section 2 within the line drawing meetings themselves in a full group discussion, I think will take much too much time. So we need to kind of specialize and focus. But there are some variations in terms of how much you want to get done leading up to that first meeting. And some of it may revolve around how much delegation you want to provide to this working team that I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is a team that will include two commissioners, the Gibson-Dunn team, Q2, and then staff as needed to engage in some of these tasks in parallel with the public hearing schedule. Now, again, the most extreme option might simply be you guys draw the lines. In other words, put it all together, and we'll look at them and we'll say yes or no, or we'll make revisions to those. Others may simply be we need to have another option is simply we need to have some significant changes here. We would recommend moving in these directions, but you don't get to that high level of specificity. So there's a fair amount of full commission review of the maps. And then a third alternative is a very hands-off, very little actual set of recommendations on the lines, but simply here's the analysis we have of other maps. Here are ways we could go. But you have to spend a lot of time in the full commission discussing a lot of these different possibilities. So there's, again, I want to get some, before putting forth a motion, I wanted to get a sense of the commission where people might be leaning in terms of this kind of proposal. But the fundamental proposal would still focus on having a working team. And I guess if there's opposition to that, we should talk about that. That's where the motion would go.
Let me just ask for clarification. Are you talking about a working team for Section 2 districts only? Or are you talking maybe working teams per region? What are you, because you started out with a working team proposal for Section 2 to look at alternatives for statewide maps when working with Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher and Mr. Barreto. So you kind of highlighted Section 2 only, maybe like a parallel working group, and I was wondering if your proposal was considering something greater with other districts that are not Section 2.
No, not at this point. Again,
Okay, so
that's been raised by Commissioner Blanco. I think it's an appropriate area for discussion. My motion, once I get some sense of the commission, would only go to the Section 2 districts.
And how many commissioners? I guess we'd be limited to probably 2.
2.
Okay. Anyone have any thoughts on this parallel working team proposal? Commissioner Baraba?
I would lean towards the second item where you would come back with not specifics, but issues. I forgot how you described it, but you had 3 phases, 3 approaches. I thought the second one sounded better to me. Could you kind of repeat that?
I'm not sure it was second, first, or third. Yeah, in essence, I guess an intermediate position would be that this team would come back to the commission on the 23rd with some progress reports regarding analysis of alternative maps, and this is largely through existing statewide maps, and that as we got to close to the first line drawing meeting, we would ideally have some written set of recommendations that would include, as you're suggesting, ways we ought to approach this. In other words, recommendations for perhaps, moving certain districts or unpacking one district and creating another one, that kind of thing.
Is your idea in that regard that the 2 commissioners that could be on this working team could provide direction to Q2? I mean, you're taking it so to that point that the commission would be giving delegated authority to these individuals to discuss various options with Q2, because it doesn't seem like it's going to work as well as you're suggesting unless Q2 is going to say, well, what about this and what about that? And the team members would have to come back to the commission, and that just seems like it kind of defeats the purpose of having this working group, unless you're suggesting maybe not delegated authority, but then to work out various options that are then brought back. But you still have some decision-making on the part of the commission members to direct Q2. But Ms. Johnston has a comment.
If you're going to delegate power, even if it's just to 2 people, then it has to be done at a public meeting that those 2 people have to meet. So it can be purely advisory.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you. So that answers that question.
Right. But
Commissioner Dye, sorry.
But I think you're right in the sense that there has to be some interaction with Q2 in order to develop. You can't get the maps, well, you could try somebody else's software, but I think you want to work with our mappers to figure that out.
Commissioner Dye.
Yeah, actually, this is a question for Ms. Johnson as well. Isn't it correct that that rather than setting up a new body here, that if we actually involved a couple committee members, advisory committee members from different advisory committees, that we could actually get more people than 2?
Not if you're delegating power to this new group. You're in fact creating a new group.
Okay, so basically it can be no more than 2.
If
you're delegating.
It can be more than 2 if it's done in public sessions. And even if it's only 2, it can't have any delegated power.
Commissioner Blanco.
That just put a wrinkle in what I was thinking. Because I was thinking that one way sort of to go the option 2, and I think maybe we can still figure this out, with the June 23rd date that Commissioner Anchetta proposed, is that actually something be brought. We have 2 business meetings, Fresno and Stockton, which I have already spoken to Q2 about being available. And my thought was precisely this, that we could be at that meeting and that we could come with some recommendations or ideas, whatever we're calling them, that's legal, in terms of how they come to us, but that they come to us and at that meeting we go through them. So I would feel very comfortable with that. I don't know what the structure has to be, and maybe it's just a 2-person committee that makes a presentation at the Fresno and at the Stockton meeting on the Section 2 issues with our mappers there, and we begin to draw. So I would go with that notion.
Commissioner Anchetta.
Yeah, and I would note that probably doesn't require a motion either, I think, in terms of...
They're already delegated.
Because I think, well, if you made it 2, these 2, we could do that already, but I'm not sure if Commissioner... I'm happy to do that.
No, there's a lot of work that's being put on Commissioner Anchetta and Commissioner DiGiulio. And as far as this work plan, they're really going to be working closely with Q2 and following the directions that the Commission gives. So I certainly don't think it's right or fair for them to have this additional burden. I like the idea. So, and does the Commission have any further comments on this parallel track idea? Otherwise, I'd like to take volunteers of 2 commissioners that can help. And basically, it'll be almost similar to what Commissioner Anchetta and Commissioner DiGiulio are doing, which is coordinating ideas and making sure the work's getting done on Section 2 areas. Commissioner Yao?
I have a question for Ms. Johnson. The issue before us is trying to determine whether a district is a Section 2 district or not. And we're having a consultant giving us that input, and that input really is a very cut and dry decision. Does it or does it not meet the definition of a district, Section 2 district? It is not a decision that involved the entire commission to make. So I don't see this as really a quote-unquote open meeting issue where we're trying to make a decision separate in a closed session away from the public. I think in this particular case, we're just simply trying to understand as to whether it does or does not meet the requirement of a Section 2 city. So on that basis, I don't think the Open Meeting Act applies. And I think as many commissioners as he or she wanted to can participate in this in deciding, well, again, with the help of our consultant, as to whether we do or don't have a Section 2 district.
Certainly, as many commissioners as you decide can take part in the process, but if it's more than 2 members, it has to be a public process, that's all. And I think that probably what you're going to be getting from the professor is not a cut and dry yes or no. It will be an opinion based on different factors and things you should consider but perhaps Commissioner Anchetta could speak more to that.
Commissioner DiGiulio, and we do have to move on.
Can I just suggest this? I think one of the strategies that Commissioner Anchetta and I have realized too is, as part of this work plan team, there are a lot of things that we'll be doing, but there's a lot of things we're also trying to delegate a little bit. And I do think there's some element with our skills being, a little more legal, a little more technical. As I've identified, I think there's some things that I'll be trying to work through and trying to get some technical things set up. And maybe there's some things in this situation with Section 2 that Commissioner Anchetta can continue to work with. And then adding one more person, and I'm going to throw out Commissioner Dye only because I think there's an element too that a lot of this will take place in conjunction with Q2 and our VRA, and I think the proximity of their physical location helps out a lot because, to be honest, we have a very short time deadline, and it's really occurred to me that you have to be available on a this has happened already. This has happened with us that we've had to readjust our plans within a couple hours to meet with these contractors. So I would suggest that maybe Commissioner, I'm not sure, I haven't talked to him. Would that work with Commissioner Anchetta and Commissioner Dye focusing on this legal issue? And but anyway, I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah. I'm happy to do that. I think there's a party configuration issue regarding the two of us, but I think functionally that makes a lot of sense. But there's a party issue that's here, since we're two Democrats.
Yeah. Any other Commissioner Glamis-Malloy?
Yeah, I would concur. I think that it would be good for our process to have a balance amongst who's doing the work. I think I caught Commissioner Baraba's eye, and he might be willing to play this role.
And I also suggest either one of you, actually, because of your proximity and your other party affiliation. I think that both serves the purpose as well. I'm sorry, I forget there's people outside of San Francisco. So I'll let you two discuss that.
Chair?
Commissioner Ward.
Is there, I know Commissioner Baraba's already doing a couple other things. Is teleconference just not an option for this position, so we could open it up to more broadly?
It's hard because you need to sit in front of a computer and look at the maps. That's the hard thing. Obviously, a lot can be done via teleconference. I'm not saying that you can't do it, but there's a lot of sort of be there and look at what's going on and which is why, for example, there's going to be a meeting that has to pull people together to look at some of those statewide maps. That's happening tomorrow.
And we are anticipating that this meeting with the two commissioners, Gibson, Dunn, and Q2 on Section 2 issues would be occurring in preparation for next week's meeting, correct? I mean, they need to move that quickly. So volunteers, let's move it along.
Okay, so I live 10 minutes from probably the site where we need to meet, recognizing that Commissioner Baraba is already leading on IFB and other projects. I'm happy to take on this role.
Commissioner Baraba, did you want to volunteer for this as well?
I'm available. It's an hour and a half drive to Q2's office, so it's not that far from me.
Okay, are you volunteering? And use your microphone, please.
Yes, I am.
Okay. I don't think we need a motion. It's in the work plan. They'll just coordinate with Commissioner Anchetta probably for some more focus in that regard. One final aspect at a tech and outreach is this issue of reports, preparation of the final reports. Was that what you wanted to address, Commissioner Anchetta?
Yes. Again, we could push it back a little bit because in terms of but to float the idea is that we do need to have some significant commission oversight because the responsibilities for putting the final map together, a final report, and as well as a draft report, and there's some discussion that only have to occur regarding what do we want to actually include in a draft report. But we need to have.
Let me just. I don't mean to cut you off, but we do have a matter of time, and I already have an answer to this. Last week, because I have seen that, and I'm the chair. I'll take that prerogative right now. We have seen quite a number of issues coming up in this discussion, and in that regard, I asked our executive director, Mr. Claypool and Mr. Biller, to put together a document based on the contractual provisions of Q2 and Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher, and also understanding what the provisions are under Prop 11 and Prop 20 regarding staff preparation of these reports. So you have been provided by our executive director a worksheet, or I guess a summary, let's say, of their analysis of the contractual provisions, or the provisions in the contract for Q2 and the provisions in the contract for Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher. And we're looking at the contractual language, not the IFB and not their bids and not their proposals, because DGS does not look at that. So I invite you at this point to take a look at it. Commissioner Anchetta, Commissioner DiGiulio, attached to it are the contracts as well. So if in making your work plan you have some questions regarding that, I ask that you please forward them through the chair to Mr. Claypool or Mr. Miller as to their analysis of the reporting responsibilities. Okay. And so take a look at it. We'll probably have to defer further discussion on final report when Mr. Miller's here, and he'd ask that to be deferred till Fresno anyway. But I've already tasked them to do this.
Thank you for having the answer.
Okay. And we will just, for next
Was
meeting...
that the answer?
Yeah.
Is it good enough answer?
It's a good answer. But at some point, we should settle on the timelines. So that can be deferred to next meeting.
Sure. Okay. We can take a look at the timeline. Commissioner Ontai, I know you were part of the Tech and Outreach. Is there anything that you'd like to highlight or recognize for deferral? Sorry.
Yes. Read the policy manual, page 18 to 20, regarding the security plan. That's it.
Anything that you'd like to highlight for this evening's meeting? Maybe fill in the chair. Okay, we can. Okay, just for highlights, anything that was not discussed on the agenda may be considered deferred out of Tech and Outreach, unless there's anything else that you need to highlight.
Yeah, actually, it's number 4 of that security plan on page 19. If you would quickly turn to that. I think the issue that was raised was to automatically remove members from the public if they show any signs of disruption. And I think it's clearly stated there that that will occur. So I think that covers one of the issues that was raised at our last meeting. Comments?
Seeing none? Okay.
The other item that I have here, there's a comment here that says displays of presentations not previously approved by the commission chair. I'm not sure, I'm not an attorney, but it seems to me that's a violation of free speech. Maybe others can comment on that.
I think all we were saying is that it didn't disrupt the view of others, and obviously you might get into an issue of making sure that it's appropriate and not, what's the word I'm looking for, offensive. And so we were talking about maybe in the back of the room so that it doesn't block somebody's view, that type of thing.
All right, maybe we just need to clarify that, and that's it.
Okay. Anything further from Tech and Outreach?
None for me.
Okay. Finance Administration has 5 minutes, and so does Public Information. Now you know how legal feels when we get pushed to the bottom of the agenda.
Thank you, Chair.
We're used to it, yeah.
That's all right. I actually think that I appreciate the discussions we had today, and they were much more important than the F&A items that we have for this meeting. So a couple of quick things before I turn over to Dan, who's going to give us an update on our budget and financials really quickly. He just distributed an abbreviated financial report for your review. As you know, I also sent around the tweaks to the policy manual based on the request of the Commission. I did not hear any objections, so I don't think we need to vote on it again. In terms of the personnel and equipment contracts, some of that's been addressed by the chair in terms of the contractual language. Basically, I had sent around 3 resumes, which hopefully you had a chance to look at in the last few hours. For Q2, as you know, we have to approve all staff. And before we vote on this, I'm going to go ahead and let Mr. Claypool do his report, but then I will be asking for a vote to approve. This is at no additional expense to the Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Dye, who has graciously given me 1 minute. I have actually passed out the abbreviated expenditures. The important thing to notice on this is that you are at 58% of your expenditure of your budget, and that includes encumbrances. You're doing well. We're on track. We have major expenditures coming, but we're starting to see our invoices from our line drawer and from our VA attorneys, and that's the important part. I'll go to the fiscal year end close. It's pretty much completed. Ms. Davis spent a great deal of time these last 2 days, just getting all of our invoices in, all the TECs in, and so forth. The Department of General Services granted us a 2-day extension, and we were grateful for that. And the only other thing here that I need to address is the additional administrative support for cataloging public testimony. These 3 resumes that are going to be presented to you by Commissioner Dye are for that position. Now, they will be hired in by Q2 as their employees. However, at this point, the determination, I think, has been made that they will be her employees as a contractual obligation, and you'll see that in the document that was distributed to you. That's all I have.
So with that, I would like to make a motion to go ahead and approve the 3 additions to Q2 staff.
Q2. Second.
I have a question. Has some personnel from Q2 already interviewed these people? Have they otherwise been vetted in the customary?
Yes, I believe, and I believe what had happened was Kyle, the note taker, has previously worked in. Okay, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, but these were people that she was familiar with and have experience in not just randomly inputting data, but actually know how it's supposed to be done on the survey takers, correct. So apparently these came highly recommended from our note takers, and they have been interviewed by the Q2 team in general.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay. Open public comment on the motion for review of resumes of Q2? Seeing none. I'll ask for a roll call vote, Ms. Sargis, or reading back the motion and the roll call.
The motion is to approve the 3 additional staff to Q2, and I was trying to get their names, but I have them. So, okay. Commissioner Aguirre?
Yes.
Anchetta?
Yes.
Baraba?
Yes.
Blanco?
Yes.
Dye?
Yes.
DiGiulio?
Yes.
Wilkins Weber?
Yes.
Forbes?
Yes.
Columbus Malloy?
Yes.
Antai?
Yes.
Parvenu?
Yes.
Raya?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Yao?
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Anything further from Finance? Thank you very much for being right on time. Public information.
Okay, there's a new handout for this evening's hearing. Have we heard from your community, designed to help the public who is offering testimony get an idea of what is important for us to hear from them tonight regarding the maps. And also, of course, going forward, it was also issued as a press release. It's in your email, so I hope you had a chance to look at it. And it continues to show the criteria applied so that people still have a sense of what the important bits of information are. I'll jump right down to the website because that's also posted. The previous changes requested have been made with respect to referral to outside assistance, and we did also include the referral to outside assistance. If you need help preparing your testimony, here's some people that can help you get prepared. And let's see, I think that's going forward. We are also reaching out to Mr. Wilcox is reaching out to a number of statewide organizations. For example, California Association of Nonprofits, I think is the name. Maybe I should do you want to speak to those groups?
Yes, we're including Council Association of Council State Governments, California League of Cities, again, going back and saying we really need to redouble the efforts. Association of Nonprofits in the state, other groups. Many of our outreach partners are just redoubling their efforts. We're really trying to make an impetus on getting the public to comment on the second draft maps, especially those that may have not been represented before, and we will continue to do that.
Well, I have one question. Based on the advice of council and their recommendation for greater outreach in the Los Angeles County region as well as in Stockton, has public information or you, Mr. Wilcox, maybe reassessed that focus based on the advice of council?
Yes, and identifying groups to do that, including the Southern California area governments, and we are identifying those groups and reaching out to them, including the Stockton area.
Is it too much to ask for some sort of, just so that our council who was concerned about that, it can be made aware, maybe if you put together a list of what this special outreach would be to LA County, or the special outreach plan that you've developed for Stockton to address their concerns, just so that they know what we've done? Is that possible?
Oh, of course we can do that. And also, if any commissioners have specific recommendations to any organizations to add to the list, because we really want to apply it statewide, but we will focus on the areas that have been identified by council.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I will be happy to do that. My concern prior was the appropriateness of commissioners to reach out individually, but if that's a request, then I'd be happy to do that.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything further from public information?
That's it.
And one other thing, does the commission have anything further that they would like to ask of Finance and Administration or public information? That is something that we always put out there if there's additional. Commissioner Anchetta.
I would just like to ask staff to figure out what the implications of the budget veto by Governor Brown will have on our budget.
Mr. Claypool, where is he at? Ms. Sargis, will you make a note that we have asked Mr. Claypool to look at the impact of the veto on the budget and what effect it may have for us in the next fiscal year? Anything further?
Just a quick comment, Chair. Is that, as Mr. Claypool said before, we technically have 3-year money, so technically it shouldn't affect us, but actually we'll just have to keep monitoring it.
Okay. So Ms. Sargis will get that memo to Mr. Claypool. In the meantime, unless he has an opinion now, you've got 30 seconds.
I'll do it in 10. The budget veto doesn't affect us because it is 3-year money, and the State Controller's Office has already agreed to pay our bills.
Wonderful. Answers that. There's three final things that I would like to address as chair, because we did skip over it. It kind of fits in under the agenda under the public input hearing format and structure and operations, which was on the agenda, and because we do have one coming up in almost an hour. There's 3 issues that I've noticed in putting together at least the introduction, and again, we have a slightly different focus here, and there's 3 things that have come up to my attention that maybe we need to quickly brush through. First of all, I'll take the easiest ones. I haven't had a chance to review the security policy again, but does the commission desire breaks and breaks together? Before, we were not taking breaks. We do have quite a number of people that we anticipate this evening. And so I am recommending that we do take breaks together and that they be done probably in an hour-and-a-half format. If no objection, that's the way I'm going to proceed unless... Okay, no objection. One other suggestion was to forego introduction of the commissioners and move forward with the public input. Does anybody against that proceeding? In other words, the bios are contained in the information we're handing out. They can have that, so there won't be any individual introduction to the commission members.
The one exception I might ask if our local host might say a few words on our behalf.
Fine, wonderful. One other issue might be a little bit more... well, anyway, we can make a decision for tonight if we want to defer the discussion later, is especially when we're in city council chambers, whether or not the commission desires to do the Pledge of Allegiance. You had raised the issue, that's why.
Yeah, I had raised the issue that if we were going to do it, we should do it everywhere, especially where we're in an official setting. I think it's a good practice to do that in government meetings, and if we wanted to start today, then it's just a consistent practice when we're in official city, not just city, but official government buildings. I think it will. I know there was some concern that we've been criticized and whether we would be doing this, giving in to that criticism. I really have thought about that a great deal, and I think actually it will add a lot of decorum to our meetings, particularly in government buildings, and I think it would be respectful to do so.
Any other discussion? Otherwise, we'll start this evening unless there's an objection, and I don't feel that we need a motion on that. So recommendation, I'll talk to Commissioner Blanco about where we put that in on the timing. Anything further? Seeing none. At this hour, as we customarily do at the conclusion of our business meetings, we open the microphone to any public comment. I understood that there might have been some people who wanted to address the commission on items that are not on the agenda. I thought there was some, okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Well, then I guess he might have missed it then. Anything further? Then we will adjourn. Thank you.
What's the plan?
I'm sorry.